They say every mansion has secrets, but I never imagined that scrubbing the floors of the Thornwood estate would lead me to discover a room that shouldn't exist. A room that would unravel everything I thought I knew about the family I worked for, and about myself. The morning light filtered through the towering windows of Thornwood Manor like liquid gold, illuminating dust particles that danced in the air like tiny spirits. I watched them for a moment, my hands submerged in a bucket of soapy water, my knees aching against the cold marble floor. This was my life now, 28 years old, scrubbing the floors of a mansion that could fit my entire apartment building inside its east wing alone. My name is Elena Reyes, and I am invisible. At least, that's what I'd become over the past 6 months working as a cleaner for the Thornwood family. The wealthiest family in Blackwater Heights, owners of Thornwood Industries, a conglomerate so vast that their influence stretched across real estate, technology, and pharmaceutical empires. And here I was, on my hands and knees, making sure their floors sparkled bright enough to reflect the chandeliers that probably cost more than I'd earn in a lifetime.
Elena.
Mrs. Carson's sharp voice cut through my thoughts like a knife through butter. The head housekeeper appeared at the end of the hallway, her gray hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her face into a permanent expression of disapproval. The West Wing needs to be finished before Mr. Thornwood returns from his business trip this evening. And for heaven's sake, put some effort into it. These floors should shine like mirrors. Yes, Mrs. Carson, I replied automatically, not bothering to mention that I'd been scrubbing for the past 3 hours and these floors already looked pristine. But that was the thing about working for people with this kind of money. Nothing was ever quite good enough. She clicked away on her sensible heels, leaving me alone once more in the vast emptiness of the manor. I wrung out my cloth and continued my work, moving methodically from one section to another. The routine had become meditation for me, a way to shut off my mind and forget about the stack of medical bills sitting on my kitchen table, forget about my mother lying in that hospital bed across town, forget about the crushing weight of being the only thing standing between her and financial ruin. Cancer is expensive. That's what nobody tells you when they hand you the diagnosis. They don't mention that choosing between your mother's chemotherapy and your rent becomes a monthly decision. They don't explain that pride becomes a luxury you can no longer afford, that you'll take any job, even scrubbing toilets in mansions, if it means keeping the woman who raised you alive. I pushed the thoughts away and focused on the floor beneath me. The Thornwood Manor was a labyrinth of opulence: 14 bedrooms, 18 bathrooms, a ballroom that could host 200 guests, an indoor pool, a library that rivaled some universities, and countless rooms I'd never even seen. Mrs. Carson kept the cleaning staff on strict schedules, and we were assigned specific areas. Mine was the main floor and the West Wing. A blessing, really, since the West Wing was rarely used and required minimal actual cleaning. But today felt different somehow. Maybe it was the weight of the silence, heavier than usual. Or perhaps it was the way the shadows seemed longer in the afternoon light, stretching across the marble like dark fingers reaching for something. I shook my head at my own foolishness. 6 months of isolation in this massive house was making me melodramatic. I finished the main corridor and gathered my supplies, heading toward the West Wing. This part of the manor always gave me an odd feeling, not quite unsettling, but definitely strange. The West Wing was older than the rest of the house, part of the original structure built by Augustus Thornwood in 1897. The current owner, Alexander Thornwood, had renovated most of the manor when he inherited it 10 years ago, but he'd left the West Wing largely untouched, preserving its historical integrity.
Or so the story went.
As I walked down the West Wing corridor, my footsteps echoing in the emptiness, I noticed something odd. The late afternoon sun streaming through the tall windows created a pattern of light and shadow on the wall, and in that pattern, I could see something I'd never noticed before.
A seam.
A vertical line in the dark mahogany paneling, barely visible except when the light hit it at just this angle. I stopped, tilting my head, squinting at the wall. My heart began to beat faster, though I couldn't quite explain why. Slowly, I approached the panel, setting down my bucket and reaching out to trace the line with my fingertips. It was definitely a seam, running from floor to ceiling. And when I pressed gently against it, I felt the slightest give, as if the panel wasn't quite flush with the wall. The discovery that would change everything came in the form of a small, brass button hidden in the ornate carving of a rose. My fingers found it almost by accident, exploring the decorative woodwork that adorned the paneling. The moment I pressed it, I heard a soft click, followed by a mechanical whir that seemed to come from inside the walls themselves. My breath caught in my throat as the panel slowly swung inward, revealing darkness beyond.
A hidden door. A secret passage. In all my months of
working here, Mrs. Carson had never mentioned anything about hidden rooms or passages. The staff certainly didn't know about it, I would have heard them gossiping. The Thornwood Manor had plenty of fascinating features we whispered about during our breaks. The wine cellar with bottles worth more than cars, the art collection featuring original Monets and Picassos, the master bedroom with its automated everything. But a secret room? This was something else entirely. I knew I should walk away. I knew I should close the panel, forget I'd ever seen it, and finish my cleaning duties like the good invisible employee I was supposed to be. Curiosity had no place in my life right now. I needed this job, needed the paycheck that came every 2 weeks like clockwork, needed the health insurance that Mrs. Carson had somehow managed to get approved for me after my 3rd month. But my mother's voice echoed in my mind, from back when I was a little girl, Mija, you were born with a curious heart. Never let the world make you small enough to ignore it. Before I could think better of it, I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam of light cut through the darkness beyond the door, revealing a narrow corridor that stretched back into the depths of the mansion. The walls were the same mahogany paneling as the rest of the West Wing, but covered in a fine layer of dust that suggested no one had been here in quite some time. I glanced back down the main corridor.
Empty. Silent.
Mrs. Carson was probably in the kitchen coordinating tonight's dinner preparations. The other staff members were scattered throughout the massive house, each absorbed in their own tasks. No one would miss me for a few minutes. I stepped through the doorway. The passage was narrow enough that I could touch both walls if I stretched out my arms. My footsteps were muffled by a layer of dust on the hardwood floor, and I could see my tracks trailing behind me in the beam of my phone's light. The air smelled old, not unpleasant, but definitely stale, like opening a book that had been closed for decades. After about 15 feet, the corridor opened into a room. My flashlight beam swept across the space, and my jaw dropped. It was a study, a beautiful, perfectly preserved study that looked like it had been frozen in time. A massive desk dominated the center of the room, its surface covered with papers held down by a glass paperweight. Built-in bookshelves lined 2 walls, filled with leather-bound volumes. A fireplace occupied the 3rd wall, its mantel decorated with photographs in ornate frames. The 4th wall featured a large portrait of a woman in Victorian-era clothing, her dark eyes seeming to follow my movements. But it was the desk that drew me forward, my curiosity now fully ignited and impossible to resist. The papers scattered across its surface were yellowed with age, covered in elegant handwriting that spoke of a time when penmanship was an art form. I leaned closer, careful not to touch anything, and began to read. July 15th, 1924. The doctor confirms what I already knew in my heart: I am dying. Consumption has claimed so many in our family, and now it comes for me. But I cannot leave this world without ensuring she is protected. The truth must be hidden, buried so deep that not even Alexander will find it when he grows. He must never know what his mother sacrificed. He must never know what his father did. The shame would destroy him, and I will not allow my son's future to be tainted by the sins of his parents. My heart thundered in my chest. This had to be written by Augustus Thornwood's wife, Charlotte Thornwood. I'd read about her while researching the family after I got this job. She died young, leaving behind a son who would eventually take over the Thornwood empire. But what secrets had she been keeping?
What had she sacrificed?
And what had her husband done that was so terrible it had to be hidden from their son? I should have stopped reading. I should have backed away from the desk and left this room exactly as I'd found it.
But I couldn't.
The words on that yellowed paper had hooked me like a fish on a line, reeling me deeper into a mystery I didn't yet understand. I carefully lifted the first page, using only the very tips of my fingers, and found more beneath it. Pages and pages of journal entries, letters, documents with official seals and signatures. My eyes raced across the words, pieces of a puzzle slowly assembling themselves in my mind. Charlotte Thornwood had not been born into wealth. She'd been a maid, just like me, working in the Thornwood household when Augustus was a young man. They'd fallen in love, a scandalous affair between the heir to a fortune and a servant girl. When she became pregnant, Augustus had faced a choice: follow his heart or follow his father's demands to marry someone of appropriate breeding. He'd chosen wealth and power. Charlotte had been sent away with enough money to survive, but not enough to thrive. She'd given birth to Alexander in secrecy, raising him alone for the first 5 years of his life. And then Augustus's wife, the woman he'd married for status, died suddenly, and he'd come back for Charlotte. He'd brought her and Alexander home, claiming the boy as his own son from a previous relationship, and married Charlotte in a quiet ceremony that the society pages barely mentioned. But the truth had always haunted them. Charlotte wrote extensively about the guilt, the shame, the constant fear that someone would discover Alexander was illegitimate, a bastard child who had no real claim to the Thornwood fortune. She wrote about the lengths she and Augustus went to in order to bury the past, including destroying birth records and paying off anyone who might have known the truth. The sickness grows worse each day, Charlotte had written in what appeared to be one of her final entries. Augustus promises me that Alexander will inherit everything, that no one will ever question his legitimacy. But I fear what will happen when I'm gone. I fear the secrets buried in this room will eat away at the foundation of everything we've built. If Alexander ever discovers the truth, that his father denied him for 5 years, that his mother was deemed unworthy of the Thornwood name, that his entire inheritance is built on lies, what will it do to him? God forgive me, I should have been stronger. I should have raised him away from all of this. But I was weak, and I wanted my son to have everything I never did. Now I leave him with a legacy of lies. I stood frozen, my mind reeling. Alexander Thornwood, the current patriarch of the Thornwood Empire, the man worth billions, the man whose floors I scrubbed, was the grandson of a maid. His grandmother had been just like me, scrubbing these same floors a century ago, dreaming of something more. The irony was so sharp it cut.
But there was more.
I found letters, tucked into an envelope with a broken wax seal. Letters from someone named Margaret Blackwood, written to Charlotte years after Alexander's birth. Margaret claimed to be Augustus's sister, a sister who had been written out of the family fortune and the family history after she deposed Augustus's decision to hide Charlotte and Alexander away. "You don't understand what you've done," Margaret wrote in one particularly bitter letter. "By allowing Augustus to dictate the terms of your return, by accepting this charade of respectability, you've condemned Alexander to a life of lies. And when the truth comes out, and it will, Charlotte, it always does, he will lose everything. The fortune, the name, the respect. All of it built on sand, and when the tide comes in, it will wash away as if it never existed.
You should have stayed away.
You should have raised him honestly, even in poverty. Instead, you've sold his soul for a mansion and a name that will never truly be his." The letters went on, increasingly desperate and angry, until they simply stopped. I found a newspaper clipping dated 1926, announcing Margaret Blackwood's death in a tragic accident. But handwritten in the margin, in Charlotte's distinctive script, were 2 words that sent chills down my spine: no accident. What had happened to Margaret? Had she been silenced to protect the Thornwood secrets?
And if so, who had done it? Augustus?
Someone else in the family? The possibility hung in the dusty air of that hidden room like a ghost refusing to rest. I was so absorbed in the documents that I didn't hear the footsteps in the corridor outside. I didn't hear the secret door swing open wider. I didn't realize I wasn't alone anymore until a deep, masculine voice spoke from directly behind me. "Well, this is unexpected." I spun around so fast I knocked several papers off the desk, my phone's flashlight beam swinging wildly across the room before landing on the figure standing in the doorway. Alexander Thornwood. He was supposed to be out of town on business. Mrs. Carson had said he wouldn't return until evening. But here he stood, tall and imposing in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, his dark hair slightly tousled as if he'd been running his hands through it, his blue eyes, so intense they seemed to glow in the dim light, fixed directly on me. Those eyes traveled from my face to my cleaning uniform to the papers scattered on the desk to the documents still clutched in my trembling hand. In that moment, I watched his expression shift through a rapid series of emotions: surprise, confusion, understanding, and finally, something that looked almost like fear. "I can explain," I stammered, though I had absolutely no idea how to explain why I, a lowly cleaning woman, was standing in a secret room reading his family's century-old secrets. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stepped fully into the room, and I heard the soft click of the door closing behind him. We were sealed in together, trapped in this space filled with ghosts and secrets and papers that could potentially destroy everything he'd ever known about himself. Alexander Thornwood moved closer, his footsteps measured and deliberate, and I found myself backing up until my spine pressed against the bookshelf. He stopped about 5 feet away, his gaze never leaving mine, and in the beam of my phone's light, I could see the muscle ticking in his jaw. "How long?" he asked quietly. "How long have you known about this room?" "I just found it," I said quickly, my words tumbling over each other. "I swear, Mr. Thornwood, I just discovered it maybe 15 minutes ago. The light hit the wall at a certain angle, and I saw the seam, and I found the button, and I know I shouldn't have come in here, I know it was wrong, but I—" "What did you read?" He cut through my rambling with surgical precision, his voice sharp as a blade. I swallowed hard. Lying seemed pointless. He'd already caught me red-handed with his family's documents. Letters. Journal entries. From your great-grandmother Charlotte. Something flickered in his eyes. Pain? Anger? I couldn't quite tell. And what did these letters and journal entries say? This was it. This was the moment where I could choose to protect his illusion or shatter it with the truth. I thought about my own mother, about the secrets parents keep to protect their children, about the lies we tell ourselves to make the unbearable bearable. but I'd never been good at lying. That your great-grandmother was a maid, I said softly, watching his face for any reaction. That she and Augustus fell in love, that she got pregnant, and that he sent her away. That your grandfather, was born in secrecy and raised alone for the first 5 years of his life before Augustus brought them back and married her. That everything, the fortune, the family name, all of it, was built on hiding the truth about his birth. The revelation hung between us like a live wire, crackling with dangerous energy. This was the secret that had been buried for 100 years, the truth that Charlotte Thornwood had died protecting, the knowledge that could potentially unravel everything the Thornwood Empire represented. For a long moment, Alexander didn't move.
Didn't speak.
He just stood there, staring at me with those penetrating blue eyes, his expression unreadable. The silence stretched on so long that I began to wonder if he'd heard me at all, or if perhaps the shock had simply frozen him in place.
And then slowly he smiled. It wasn't a happy smile.
It wasn't the kind of smile that reached his eyes or conveyed any warmth whatsoever. It was the smile of someone who'd just confirmed their worst suspicions, someone who'd been waiting for the other shoe to drop and had finally heard it hit the floor. I knew there was something, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I've spent my entire life feeling like there was something wrong, something off about my family's history. Pieces that didn't quite fit together. Questions that no one would answer. And now here you are, a cleaning woman who stumbled into a secret room, with all the answers I've been searching for. He ran a hand through his hair, and I saw it trembling slightly. My great-grandmother was a maid. Just like you. He looked at me then, really looked at me, as if seeing me for the first time.
What's your name? Your full name?
Elena Reyes, I managed to say, my voice stronger than I felt. Elena Reyes, he repeated, tasting the syllables. Tell me, Elena Reyes, what are you going to do with this information? Are you going to sell it to the tabloids?
Blackmail me?
Demand money to keep quiet? The accusation stung, even though I understood why he'd assumed the worst.
No, I said firmly.
No, Mr. Thornwood, I'm not, I wouldn't, I just stumbled into this room by accident. I swear, I wasn't looking for secrets or trying to cause problems. I'll forget everything I read. I'll leave right now and we can both pretend this never happened. I moved to step past him, eager to escape the increasingly surreal situation, but his hand shot out and caught my wrist. Not roughly, but firmly enough to stop me.
Wait, he said.
You can't just. I need to. He trailed off, seeming to struggle with what to say. I need to know everything that's in here. I need to read what you read. Would you stay?
Just for a little while?
Help me understand what I'm looking at. It was perhaps the strangest request I'd ever received, made even stranger by the fact that it came from one of the wealthiest and most powerful men in the city. Alexander Thornwood, who could hire an army of historians and researchers and lawyers to help him sort through his family's past, was asking me, a maid he'd probably never even noticed before today, to help him understand the secrets his ancestors had buried. I should have said no. Every instinct screamed at me to get out of that room, out of that mansion, and as far away from the Thornwood family drama as possible. I had enough problems in my own life without getting tangled up in someone else's. But when I looked into his eyes, I saw something I recognized, the same desperate need to understand that had driven me into this room in the first place. The same hunger for truth that kept me awake at night wondering about my own father, the man who'd walked out on my mother and me before I was old enough to remember his face. The same ache for answers that never seemed to come. Okay, I heard myself say.
I'll stay. I'll help you.
He released my wrist and stepped back, a slight exhale escaping his lips as if he'd been holding his breath.
Thank you.
Thank you. We spent the next hour going through the documents together. I showed him everything I'd found, Charlotte's journal entries, the letters from Margaret, the hidden documents detailing Alexander's grandfather's illegitimate birth. With each page, I watched Alexander's expression shift and change, watched him process revelations that rewrote his entire understanding of his family history. This explains so much, he murmured at one point, holding up a letter from Augustus to Charlotte. My grandfather, Alexander Thornwood Sr., he always seemed different from the rest of the family. More compassionate, more willing to break from tradition. When he took over the company, he made all these changes that the board hated. He created scholarship programs for underprivileged children, he built affordable housing, he donated millions to causes that had nothing to do with maintaining the Thornwood image. The family thought he was destroying the legacy.
But he wasn't, was he? He was trying to atone.
He was trying to give back because he knew where he really came from.
I nodded slowly.
It seems like he never forgot that his mother was a maid. That he spent his first 5 years in poverty. That everything he had was because his father finally decided to acknowledge him. Alexander set down the letter and picked up one of the photographs from the mantel, a formal portrait of a stern-looking man and a beautiful woman with sad eyes.
This is them. Augustus and Charlotte.
My great-grandparents. I've seen this photograph before, in the family albums. But I never really saw her until now. Look at her expression. She looks like she's carrying the weight of the world.
She was, I said quietly.
She was carrying the weight of all these secrets. He turned to face me fully. And now you're carrying them too. Elena Reyes, who just wanted to scrub some floors and earn a paycheck. I've dragged you into something you never asked for.
You didn't drag me anywhere, I pointed out.
I'm the one who pushed the button and walked through the door. This is on me.
Still.
He trailed off, his gaze distant. This changes everything. If this information got out, if anyone discovered that my claim to the Thornwood fortune is based on a legitimized bastard, there would be legal challenges, media circuses, board members scrambling to distance themselves from the scandal. Everything my grandfather worked for, everything my father built, could come crashing down. The weight of what he was saying settled over us like a thick fog. I'd stumbled into something much bigger than a simple family secret. This was about legacy, about power, about the fundamental question of what makes someone worthy of their inheritance. What are you going to do?
I asked.
Alexander looked at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable.
I don't know.
But I do know one thing. I can't let you walk out of here and go back to your life as if nothing happened. This secret is too big, too dangerous. I need to know I can trust you, Elena Reyes. Something in his tone made my blood run cold. Are you threatening me?
No, he said quickly.
No, that's not. I'm not trying to threaten you. I'm just being honest. This information could destroy my family. I need time to figure out what to do with it, how to process it, whether to reveal it or bury it deeper than it's already buried. And I can't do that if I'm worried you're going to sell this story to the highest bidder. I already told you I wouldn't do that, I said, frustration creeping into
my voice.
You say that now. But what if I told you this information is worth millions to the right media outlet? What if I told you there are people who would pay you more money than you'd earn in 10 lifetimes for this kind of scoop on the Thornwood family? Could you honestly say the temptation wouldn't be there? I thought about my mother's medical bills. About the stacks of envelopes with red, past due stamps. About the crushing pressure of trying to keep my head above water while the current kept pulling me under. Could I honestly say I wouldn't be tempted? I can't promise I'm perfect, I admitted. I can't promise I wouldn't be tempted if someone waved that kind of money in my face. But I can promise that I won't actively seek it out. I won't go looking to sell your family's secrets. That's the best I can offer you right now. Alexander studied my face for what felt like an eternity.
Finally, he nodded. That's fair. That's honest. I appreciate that.
He glanced at his watch and frowned. Mrs. Carson will be looking for both of us soon. We need to get out of this room and act like nothing happened.
Agreed.
We carefully put all the documents back where we'd found them, trying to recreate the exact arrangement I disrupted. As we worked side by side in the dim light, I couldn't help but notice how surreal the situation was. 12 hours ago, I'd been invisible to this man. Now we were conspirators, bound together by secrets that could topple an empire. As we finished, Alexander turned to me one last time. Elena, I want you to know that I'm grateful. That you found this room. That you stayed to help me understand. And that you're willing to keep this between us, at least for now.
Thank you.
You're welcome, Mr. Thornwood. Alexander, he corrected. After today, I think we can drop the formality, don't you? Before I could respond, we both heard footsteps echoing down the West Wing corridor. Mrs. Carson's voice called out, Mr. Thornwood? I didn't realize you'd returned early. Alexander and I locked eyes for a split second, a moment of shared panic and conspiracy. Then he stepped through the secret door first, hitting the button to swing it shut behind us. By the time Mrs. Carson rounded the corner, we were standing in the hallway like two people who'd simply crossed paths by accident. Ah, Mrs. Carson, Alexander said smoothly. I came back early to handle some business. I was just heading to my study when I noticed Elena here doing excellent work in the West Wing. The floors are immaculate. Mrs. Carson looked between us, her sharp eyes narrowed with suspicion.
I see.
Well, Mr. Thornwood, your dinner will be ready in an hour. Elena, you're finished for the day. You can go home now. I gathered my cleaning supplies with trembling hands, barely able to believe I was being dismissed so easily. As I walked past Alexander toward the exit, I felt his hand brush against my arm for just a second, a gesture so quick that anyone watching might have thought it was an accident.
But I knew better.
And as I left Thornwood Manor that evening, stepping out into the cool twilight air, I realized my life had just become infinitely more complicated. I'd come here to scrub floors and pay my mother's medical bills. Instead, I discovered a secret that could change everything, not just for the Thornwood family, but for me as well. I just didn't know yet exactly how. Sleep didn't come easily that night. I lay in my cramped studio apartment, staring at the water-stained ceiling, my mind replaying every moment of that impossible afternoon.
The secret door.
Charlotte's desperate journal entries. The letters from Margaret Blackwood, full of warnings and accusations. And Alexander Thornwood's face when he realized his entire identity was built on a foundation of lies. What had I gotten myself into? My phone buzzed on the nightstand, 2:47 a.m. according to the glowing digits. I grabbed it, expecting a spam call or maybe a text from one of the overnight nurses at my mother's hospital. Instead, I found a message from an unknown number. Thank you again for today. I know this situation is complicated.
We should talk soon.
Alexander Thornwood had my phone number. Somehow, in the chaos of the evening, he must have gotten it from Mrs. Carson's staff records. The thought should have bothered me, an invasion of privacy, an abuse of power, but instead, I felt a strange flutter in my chest.
He'd reached out. He wanted to talk.
I typed and deleted 3 different responses before finally settling on something neutral, of course. Whenever you're ready. His response came almost immediately, as if he'd been waiting for me to reply, tomorrow. After your shift. My private study, not the one in the secret room. I'll have Mrs. Carson arrange it. Okay, I sent back, then added, are you all right? The pause before his response was longer this time. When it finally came, it was just 3 words that somehow conveyed volumes, I don't know.
I didn't sleep at all after that.
The next morning, I arrived at Thornwood Manor with a sense of dread sitting heavy in my stomach. Everything looked the same, the imposing iron gates, the manicured gardens, the mansion rising against the sky like a monument to wealth and power, but I knew nothing would ever be the same again.
Not for me. Not for Alexander.
We were bound together now by knowledge that could destroy everything he'd ever known. Mrs. Carson was waiting for me in the staff entrance, her thin lips pressed into an even thinner line than usual.
Elena.
Mr. Thornwood has requested your presence in his study at 3 o'clock this afternoon. You're to finish your regular duties first, of course. Of course, I echoed, trying to keep my voice steady. Did he say what it was about? Her eyes narrowed. Mr. Thornwood doesn't explain himself to me, and I certainly don't question him. But I will say this, in my 30 years of service to this family, I've never seen him take a personal interest in any member of the cleaning staff. I hope you understand the position you're in, girl. The Thornwoods are not people to be trifled with. The warning was clear. Mrs. Carson suspected something, even if she didn't know what. I nodded respectfully and hurried to start my work, hyper-aware of her gaze following me down the hallway. The morning dragged by with agonizing slowness. I scrubbed and polished and dusted, my hands moving through familiar motions while my mind raced in circles. What did Alexander want to discuss? Had he made a decision about the secret room?
Was he going to pay me off to keep quiet?
Or worse, was this some elaborate setup, a way to discredit me before I could tell anyone what I'd found? Stop it, I told myself firmly. He's not the villain here. He's just a man who discovered his entire family history is a lie. But the doubt lingered, whispering in the back of my mind. Rich people protected their secrets. They had the resources, the connections, the power to make problems disappear. And I was a problem now, whether I wanted to be or not. At 2:45 p.m., I cleaned myself up as best I could in the staff bathroom, washing my hands and face, straightening my uniform, trying to tame my dark hair into something presentable. The woman staring back at me from the mirror looked tired. Dark circles under her brown eyes, worry lines creasing her forehead. When had I started looking so worn down? I made my way to the East Wing, where Alexander's private study was located. I'd cleaned this area before but had never been inside the study itself. It was strictly off-limits to all staff. Mrs. Carson herself handled that room personally. I knocked on the heavy oak door at precisely 3 o'clock. Come in, Alexander's voice called from inside. I pushed open the door and stepped into a room that was nothing like the dusty, forgotten space of the secret study. This was a workspace of modern luxury, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the estate grounds, built-in shelves filled with contemporary business books and first editions, a massive desk made of dark wooden chrome, leather chairs that probably cost more than my monthly rent. And standing by the windows, silhouetted against the afternoon light, was Alexander Thornwood. He'd changed from his suit into dark jeans and a navy sweater, casual clothes that somehow made him look more human, more approachable. When he turned to face me, I saw the exhaustion in his features that mirrored my own.
He hadn't slept either. Elena.
Thank you for coming. He gestured to one of the leather chairs. Please sit. I sat, feeling out of place in my cleaning uniform, acutely aware of the vast difference in our stations. He seemed to notice my discomfort because he sat in the chair across from me, rather than behind his imposing desk, closing some of the distance between us. I spent all night reading through those documents, he said without preamble. Every letter, every journal entry, every scrap of paper in that room. Do you know what I realized?
I shook my head.
That my entire life is a performance. A carefully constructed illusion designed to hide the fact that my great-grandfather was ashamed of the woman he loved and the son she gave him. That my grandfather spent his whole life trying to atone for being born illegitimate. That my father inherited not just a fortune but a legacy of shame and secrecy. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. I always thought something felt wrong. I just never imagined it went back this far. What are you going to do? I asked quietly. That's why I wanted to talk to you. Because I realized something else last night. You're the only person in my life right now who knows the truth. Not my board members, not my friends, not even my mother. Just you, Elena Reyes. And I need advice from someone who has no stake in the Thornwood legacy, no reason to tell me what I want to hear instead of what I need to hear. This was the moment I realized just how isolated Alexander Thornwood truly was, so surrounded by people yet so fundamentally alone that he had to turn to a cleaning woman for honesty. You want my honest opinion? I asked. I'm paying you for your time, he said. Or rather, I will be. Consider this a consulting fee. He pulled out a checkbook, an actual checkbook, something I hadn't seen anyone use in years, and wrote something out, tearing off the check and handing it to me. I looked at the amount and my hands started shaking. $20,000.
For one conversation.
Mr. Thornwood, I can't. Alexander, he corrected.
And yes, you can.
That money is for your discretion, your time, and your honesty. And before you argue, let me be clear, this isn't a bribe. Whether you cash that check or not, I'm still trusting you to keep this secret. The money is because you've already given me something valuable, the truth, and I believe in paying people what they're worth. I stared at the check, my mind reeling. $20,000 would cover 3 months of my mother's treatment. It would give me breathing room I hadn't had in over a year. It would mean I could sleep at night without calculating which bills to let slide into collections. Thank you, I whispered, carefully folding the check and putting it in my pocket. I'll give you my honest opinion. But I need you to understand, I'm not qualified to advise someone like you. I'm a maid with a high school diploma and a stack of medical bills. I don't know anything about managing family legacies or protecting billion-dollar empires. That's exactly why I need your perspective, Alexander said. Everyone else in my life is invested in maintaining the Thornwood image.
You're not.
So tell me, what would you do if you were in my position? I thought about it carefully, turning the question over in my mind. What would I do if I discovered my entire family history was built on lies? If I learned that the grandfather I'd never known had been hidden away in shame for the first 5 years of his life? I think, I said slowly, that you have 2 choices. You can bury it deeper, seal up that room forever, and pretend you never found out. Live with the secret the way your great-grandmother did, the way your grandfather probably did. Let the lie continue because it's easier than facing the truth. And the second choice?
Tell the truth.
Not to the media, not to the world, but to yourself and the people who matter. Stop performing and start being real. Your great-grandmother Charlotte wrote that she was afraid the lies would destroy your grandfather. But from what you said, it sounds like he turned out to be the best of all the Thornwoods, maybe because he knew where he really came from. Maybe the truth didn't destroy him. Maybe it saved him. Alexander was quiet for a long moment, his blue eyes studying my face as if searching for something. You know what's strange? I barely know you, and yet you've given me better advice in 5 minutes than my entire board of directors has given me in 5 years. That's because they're trying to protect their investment, I pointed out. I'm just trying to be honest. Honest, he repeated, as if testing the word. When was the last time someone was truly honest with me? Without an agenda, without wanting something, without calculating how their words might affect their position or their paycheck. The question hung between us, and I realized he wasn't really expecting an answer. It was rhetorical, a window into his loneliness that he'd opened without meaning to. Can I ask you something personal?
I ventured. He nodded. Why do you care so much?
I mean, you're still Alexander Thornwood. You still have the fortune, the company, the power. Whether your great-grandfather was born in a mansion or a slum doesn't change who you are today. So why does it matter? His expression shifted, something raw and vulnerable flickering across his features. Because I spent my entire childhood being told I had to be perfect. That I had to uphold the Thornwood name, honor the legacy, live up to impossible standards. My father, he stopped, his jaw clenching. My father was not a kind man. He believed in discipline, in molding me into the perfect heir. And whenever I failed, whenever I showed weakness or emotion or any sign of being human, he would tell me I was disgracing generations of Thornwood excellence. He stood and walked to the window, his back to me. But it was all a lie, wasn't it? There was no generational excellence.